Hello, this is Tommy's Outdoors 68, and today our guest is Pádraic Fogarty. Pádraic Fogarty, for me, he's really Mr. Irish Wildlife Trust, but to be specific, he's campaign officer at Irish Wildlife Trust. And Pádraic was already guest on our podcast twice, in episode 20 and in episode 35, where that episode was actually talk by Pádraic rather than the usual question-answer podcast. And also in episode 62, I talked with Patrick Cross, who is making a photo project based on Pádraic's book, Whittled Away Irish Vanishing Nature. And if you haven't read that book, you probably should, because that's one of the best books on Irish wildlife and what happened to it. So anyway, since the last time we spoke with Pádraic, there were quite a few things I want to talk to him about. One of them is rewilding and bringing back wolves to Ireland. That's something that Pádraic was quite active over the last, year, 8 to 10 months. He was talking a lot and being in the radio and so on and so forth. That's one thing I wanted to discuss with Pádraic. And another thing is the relation, or maybe is there a relation between biodiversity laws and current coronavirus outbreak. Pádraic wrote an article about it, and he was not the only one. There was quite a few people who wrote the article where they making connection between biodiversity laws and coronavirus outbreak. And I am not entirely sure if I agree with all those points, so I'm gonna continue to explore that. But for a good start, I thought that it's gonna be good to talk to Pádraic about it since he wrote an article. So anyway, that's what you gonna get in this episode. I hope you will enjoy it. As usual, please go and rate the podcast if you like it. Hit that 5-star or thumbs up or whatever there is on the app that you're listening to this podcast to. That's great help for me and for the podcast. And without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Pádraic Fogarty. Pádraic, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Tommy.
It's good to hear you again.
Yes, you too. Yeah.
It was a year and a half since last time we spoke. What was happening in Irish Wildlife Trust for the last year and a half?
Well, we've been. I suppose we're a busy organisation. We're busy all the time. Actually, one of the projects we've started up since last we spoke is our bigger and better project in relation to marine protected areas. So we're working with Seas at Risk, which is a big European NGO, and our job really is to try and get marine protected areas up and running in Ireland, make them bigger, make them better.
Yeah, I heard that this is the marine protected areas is actually the only hope at the moment, or maybe the biggest, the initiative that gives the most results in terms of protecting the marine wildlife and marine environment.
Oh, they've been well proven throughout the world. Actually, places in the tropics are way ahead of us compared to Europe and in Ireland in particular. I mean, we've already agreed to establish 10% of our seas as marine protected areas, something we were supposed to have done by this year. But at the moment in Ireland, we're about 2.5%. So we're really bottom of the heap when it comes to MPAs.
It seems like Ireland is really dragging behind in terms of all those environmental measures.
Yeah, it is. It's. I mean, I'm glad you said that, Tommy. It's not just me. I think it is everywhere we look. Ireland is bottom of the heap, and I think it's I mean, the last 10 years we've had a political body, I suppose, that was set up to deal with the economic crash, and the environment just hasn't really featured at all on their agenda since they came to power. So, I mean, for anyone looking for rays of hope, we did have an election back in February that elected quite a few TDs that were, had strong environmental platforms. So, I mean, we're hoping change is on the way.
Yeah, that you hope that that would include the changes to the forestry policies and our favorite Sitka spruce plantations.
Oh, but it's across the board. I mean, forestry, yes, farming, ocean protection, climate change, the state of our waterways, the state of our protected areas, the state of the National Parks and Wildlife Service. It really is across the board. It needs a total
Mm,
overhaul. But I mean, these are things that have been said many times over. So the pressure
yeah,
is mounting. I mean, we've seen the announcement of the European Green New Deal this year.
yeah,
So it's only going in one direction.
yeah. So there is hope. Um, Listen, we obviously have at the moment a health emergency and people are locked down. There's no way to kind of skip that. And I heard that across the boards, all the charities and organizations that rely on funding from supporters, let's say, are seeing a hit. Is that something that you see that Irish Wildlife Trust will be hit by that as well?
It's not something we've noticed, to be honest. Now, bear in mind, the Irish Wildlife Trust runs really on a shoestring budget, so we rely on our
Hmm.
our members paying their annual subscriptions. So,
Hmm.
that's not something that really has been affected. We don't do a lot of big projects, let's say, for government or state agencies. We do some here and there, and we'll probably see the effects of that now over the summer, obviously, because we can't hold events or anything for the time being.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a joke within the Irish Wildlife Trust that when the nuclear apocalypse hits, it'll be the cockroaches and the Irish Wildlife Trust that are left, because we've survived for so long on practically nothing.
Oh, that's good. That's a good news because to be honest, I thought that you're gonna say something opposite, like, yeah, we're seeing the hit, we're seeing whatever, and then, but even though you don't see anything, any hit in the financial hit, I think it's a good moment to tell anyone that anyway, they should support Irish Wildlife Trust and donate and be members. And I guess the message I want to take this opportunity and say, I'm well aware that a lot of people who are my listeners, because I have a listeners on kind of very wide spectrum, and a lot of them are hunters, anglers, farming background. They're not in, they don't like Irish Wildlife Trust too much. Let's put it this way. And I suppose the message I'm giving all the time is like, let's work on the pieces that we agree on. And I think that when it comes to nature and protection, there's more things that we can agree than we disagree. And I myself don't agree with everything that I see coming from Irish Wildlife Trust. Nevertheless, I'm supporting you guys for year and a half, 2 years, since the last time we spoke, because I think we always should focus on the things that we have in common.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, I agree with you. I think we have to be working on solutions. I think one of the frustrating things I have found in my work is that we're not working on solutions. I mean, there's a lot of, arguments going on social media or whatever, but there's very little
Mhm.
work actually taking place on the ground on solutions. And that's
Mm.
because we don't nobody at the moment really has the means to implement solutions. And the reason that is because, at a very high political level, um, there's very little. There's very little will to be working on the big solutions. I mean, I don't expect everyone to agree with us any more than I expect us to ever be completely in agreement with, all the other interest groups out there, but I definitely think there's enough will in the country to address the problems. And certainly, what I see across the board is that there is increasing recognition of the problems that exist. But I mean,
Mm.
I wouldn't say that is, it's not everywhere. Let's say, I still
Mhm.
see an awful lot of denialism
Mhm.
about the problems that exist, and also about the changes that need to happen to address those problems.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's always, change, whatever walk of life and whatever type of thing you touch. The change is also always something that meets resistance. I think that's just a human nature.
Yeah, and I think certainly what I try to do. I'm not, maybe we're not successful at it all the time, but um, I try in the Irish Wildlife Trust to promote the solutions, that, particularly in the big conflict areas such as farming and fishing,
Hmm.
we are trying to paint a picture of what Ireland could look like, in
Yes.
30, 40 years' time that includes farmers and fishermen. We're not trying to put these entire sectors out of business, but at the same time, we do have to utterly transform everything, the way
Yeah.
we go about business. So yeah, of course, it's going to be a difficult message.
Yeah, 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 and I never realized, until I really started doing that podcast and talking with various people. I never realized how much conflict is in that area. Like literally, one of the things that I was almost shocked was when it occurred to me that even something like term rewilding is really, very emotional, and it's almost triggers some people, and you say, oh, rewilding, yeah, whatever, and it's like, whoa, why is that, and then, all these discussions, like, oh, you want to rewild, you want to get farmers out of business, no, you want to, like, it's like, whoa. I was surprised, to be honest, that something like rewilding, I like internally I think that, oh, it has to be good because it's conservation, it's a habit, it's habitat protection. Why anyone would be against it? And then there's a whole sector of people, or a bunch of people, who are, their understanding of rewilding is completely different than mine, and they see this as a threat to their lifestyle, their livelihood.
Yeah, I understand that. I think in one way we have no history of conservation in Ireland. I
Mm.
mean, that's just a fact. It's a totally different situation to, let's say, the United States, for instance, where they've had a conservation movement. Um, I mean, we've had conservation agencies and everything, but I mean, in the last 30, 40 years, conservation in Ireland has been a total failure. So we don't have a conservation mindset in Ireland anywhere. So the idea of rewilding, and I think it's one of the useful things about it, is that it is triggering. It does make people sit up and go, okay, this isn't just another government program. This is a totally, radical concept for our country. I mean,
Mm.
that's important to get that feeling across. I mean, there are people who have said, rewilding is about, just getting rid of people and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, obviously we don't agree with that, and we have gone to some lengths to try and dispel the myths about rewilding. But I don't think that should mean we should be shying away from the word or from the central concepts of rewilding. I think it's a really important thing. It just means we have to work harder at communicating what we mean by it, and how we see it actually working on the ground.
Yeah, yeah. Is that the structure of land ownership, or perhaps the um, lack of areas that are, well, suitable for rewilding? Is that the source of the pushback? That like literally, like most of the land is owned privately by farmers, and naturally, when they hear rewilding, they see, oh, somebody gonna come and take our land and put the wolves or lynx there.
instead of cattle.
I mean, I think the roots of this run very, very deep. I mean, there are things that are unique to Ireland. There are things that are unique to, our Western civilization and the way we see land. But particularly in Ireland, uh, there is an attitude of that land must be useful. It must be, put to work. And,
Right.
we see this all the time, the way casually people refer to, waste ground or, land that has just gone into wilderness here sometimes as being a bad thing. There was a headline in the Irish Farmers Journal recently that says, um, pay farmers properly or allow wilderness to return, and they meant it as a bad thing. You know,
Oh wow.
but that mentality runs very, very deep, and I suppose it has its roots in, hardship and poverty, and, perhaps going back as far as the famine and, all the conflicts we've
Mhm,
had over land over the years. So
mhm,
the central idea behind rewilding is, can we change our entire ethic? Can we change our mentality to look at land in a totally different way and say, yeah, of course, we absolutely need to farm land to produce food, but we don't need to farm absolutely everywhere. We don't. I mean, and this is the thing in Ireland.
mhm,
We have sheep out on islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean where there are no people. We have sheep on the tops of mountains. We have got this mentality that we have to farm absolutely every square meter, but we don't. And I think if we can step back and
mhm.
appreciate that, land can have other values, and letting nature just do its thing can be a valuable thing. That's really the argument about rewilding. In many ways, it's a mental, psychological issue as much as a policy issue.
Yeah, yeah. And if you would give like a one biggest value of having a wilderness and having a wildlife outside of the let's park for a moment the idea of like, oh, we're gonna pay farmer thousands and thousands of euro for designating their land into the wilderness, right? Because that's obvious, that's a value for a farmer. But minus that, what would be, in your view, the biggest benefit of having a wild wilderness areas in Ireland?
Yeah, I think the great prize that's at stake here is um, the reconnection between people and nature, and being able
Mm,
to find our place within a natural system. Of course, this is an enormous question, and it's rather a
mm,
deep and meaningful kind of an aspiration. But I actually think this is really, really important. Our entire global ecological crisis, whether we're talking about, climate change and the collapse of ecosystems and the water crisis, all these interconnecting problems, they have their roots in our dysfunctional relationship with nature. Now, that might seem very lofty and far away, but I mean, it very much applies to every one of us as we go about our daily business in as much as it does at a global scale. And I mean, for example, if I live somewhere in Ireland, whether it's, in a suburb or out in the countryside, where do I
mhm,
go to see nature? What is my contact with nature? Is it
mm,
is this the little birds that come and visit my garden? I mean, is that the extent of it? Is there anywhere I can go where I can really feel that, nature has been unleashed? I mean, you might say, particularly, you go out to the Atlantic Ocean, you see the waves crashing and the cliffs and all this, and it feels very wild. But there's very little life left in the seas, or compared to what was there
mhm,
before. So, I think that that's really what's at stake. And that's why the whole idea of rewilding is so important. And by the way, I think that's also why I feel that, rewilding is something that can be done by people in their gardens as much as something that can be done on a landscape level. I do hear,
mm,
certain rewilding purists, talk about, no, 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 it has to be X, Y, and Z. I think rewilding can occur, pretty much anywhere. And when you see people as I've seen in Dublin this spring, not cutting their grass and letting dandelions grow and putting a sign in the
Yeah.
garden saying, this is, I'm leaving this for the bees. I think that's really great. I think that's fantastic.
Hmm.
This is very much a democratic idea, and it's very much an individual and a community thing. It's not just kind of a pet project for
Yeah.
conservation.
This is you touch on very important point that quite often is we have this nicely cut lawns and sprayed with a ton of herbicide and pesticide, and it's like it looks like a nice green grass, but in reality it's completely dead. It's like a mini monoculture on somebody's yard. And if that could be a starting point, kind of to get into psyche, into mentality of people, like, hey, what are you actually doing? This is not nature. You don't, it's like grass is not enough. There's, like you said, whether it's a pollinator grass or anything, and start with a small steps. Perhaps that's the way then to kind of get people more used to the idea, and then when you're talking about rewilding, they can kind of connect the dots. It's like, oh, I get it. I've done it in my garden. Why we not can do this in, I don't know, national parks, for example, or something like that?
Yeah. And that's the great value of it. And the other thing is about getting people to engage with what they're looking at. We've been told for
Mm.
so long, that Ireland is such a beautiful country and there's nature everywhere, and sure, it's green, isn't it? Isn't that all you want? Um,
Yeah.
but we haven't, and people don't know an awful lot about nature, so we've kind of just accepted that's kind of board fáilte version of Ireland. So I mean, if we can get people to look at the hills or look at the fields or the rivers or the sea and go, what's really going on here?
Yeah.
I think that would be the start of the
I mean, like,
transformation.
Irish Wildlife Trust Twitter feed ruined it for me because I was this guy who was seeing this, like, oh, what a beautiful landscape, and like, and then kind of as I was reading, it's like, oh, okay, that's not how it's supposed to be. That's actually something that. On the first glance appears as a beautiful landscape, in fact is kind of ruined landscape, and it's not what it's supposed to be. So that I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I know, and yes, I suppose part of it is kind of ruining people's perception of it, but that's really important. I mean, I still hear a lot of the role of sheep, for instance, on the hills, and that people say, no, the sheep are really important on the hills for maintaining the
Yeah,
biodiversity. But like, we have to be honest about what's happening. There's very little biodiversity left in our hills. The sheep is the biggest animal you're likely to see if you go into
that's
the
true.
west of Ireland.
That's true.
And, whereas we used to have this really rich, diverse ecosystem of forests and wetlands, and that's what we should be getting back. But like, we have to be honest about what has happened to our countryside as well. And sometimes I see a lot of resistance in facing up to that.
So look, we're talking about rewilding, and I suppose over last, well, probably a year or even more, I heard you talking quite actively about wolves, about the reintroduction of wolves, and yeah, tell us about it. What's in your mind, and how do you see this unfolding in the future?
Uh, so, I mean, I always thought it would be a good idea to bring back the many animals and plants that we've lost over the years. But last year was exceptional because Eamon Ryan, leader of the Green Party, came out and told RTA that he wanted to see wolves coming back. And that really saw the whole issue explode in the
Yeah.
media, which I
Yeah,
thought was
he
great.
he kind of backed out of this immediately, like, which was like disappointing, to be honest. I mean, disappointing from the perspective of like, whoa, you either not saying that, and once you said it, at least stick to your guns.
Yeah, I was disappointed that he backtracked on it a bit, because I thought it was really brave of him to say it, and I
Hmm.
think it's a really important conversation. And the fact that so many people laughed at him and scoffed at the idea goes to show the distance we have to travel in this country to accept just how much our relationship with nature has broken down. I mean, people kind of see wolves as scaly dragons from Lord of the Rings that are going to breathe fire on whole villages. But of course, this is just so far from the truth. So yeah, I mean, I'm genuinely enthusiastic about the idea of bringing wolves back. Now, I'm genuinely enthusiastic of bringing everything back. It's a whole Noah's Ark of creatures that we've lost over the years. I'm in favor of bringing bears back and sturgeon and right whales, and I'd love to see them all come back. Some of them have greater problems than others, but the thing about wolves and why it's so emblematic of all these other issues is just how exciting and triggering and terrifying wolves are to people, that you can kind of use wolves as a metaphor for wild nature, and you can have a conversation about bringing back wolves that won't be quite the same as talking about bringing back the Rannoch rush, for instance, which is a type of grass that grew in a bog, that won't really excite very many people.
Yeah, that's true. I got to be careful to not come across as someone who is against introduction of wolves, because I'm not. I'm just so hopelessly don't see how this could happen, and I don't know whether it's because the island is so small, or and when I talk to even I don't remember now the number of the episode, but I was talking to one of the members of one of the deer hunting organization. I think it was Irish Deer Association, Wild Deer Association of Ireland, and fundamentally, those people would love to see wolf. They would like to see boar. They would like to see all these animals, but then immediately say, "Yeah, but it would cause so massive problems for farmers." I would never say, I'm not gonna be that selfish and say we need to bring back wolves because they're gonna do all these problems. And I'm just wondering, and you're obviously aware of that, so I am wondering if what you're thinking is about, if we're gonna be talking long enough and pushing long enough, finally something will break, something will click, and we will have some options. Or because I just don't like how do you see this coming to fruition over the next, I don't know, 15 years or 10 years? I don't know, what's your time frame you have in mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, I think one of the points you made there was about the kind of pushback you get from within the conservation community, and I think really, if you have been working in conservation for the past 10, 20, 30 years or whatever, it's been a miserable time, and there's an element of Stockholm syndrome going on here. Everything is disappointment and lack of achieving targets, and we're losing our curlews or we're losing our bees. So people kind of feel, we're so beaten down. How on earth are we going to do something ambitious like, bring back wolves if we can't save, insects, for heaven's sake?
Yes.
So, and then of course there is also this fear of the farming organizations that, because they get to bang the table inside government buildings and they seem to get their way all the time. That is the kind of narrative that we've kind of grown up with. So I think a lot of conservationists and ecologists in Ireland have kind of lost the bigger picture. And you see that in Ireland and in the UK as well, where there are campaigns now to save flowers on the sides of roads. Roadside verges, how great they are for bees. And I think, well, I mean, fine, maybe they are. But I mean, is that it? Are we giving up on the land? Or is this where conservation is at now? Are we battling to save the edges along roads? I mean, jeepers, this is pathetic stuff. So we have to. We have to refine our ambition. We have to look at, the potential of Ireland and the potential to restore natural ecosystems. We are completely horrified when we look at, what's happening in Brazil and the burning of the Amazon or the destruction of forests in Southeast Asia. But we have to remember that Ireland is probably the most deforested country in the world, more than anywhere except maybe Iceland. So, and just because that happened, long ago, does that mean we should, just give up on trying to reestablish natural ecosystems in Ireland again? I really don't think so. I think we have to be ambitious. Now, the other question you asked, how is it going to actually play out? How is it going to happen in reality? I think, firstly, we have to be able to talk about it without people freaking out. We have to accept that wolves are, a native animal. They're a part of our culture. They're a part of our heritage. They belong here. I don't expect conversations to be easy. I don't expect, people to just suddenly wake up in the morning and say, oh, yeah, it's a great idea. Let's do it. It's going to take a lot of convincing and a lot of groundwork. But remember, we already know we have to completely transform how we use land in Ireland. We have to completely transform how we farm and produce food, what we do with the bogs, what we do with our forests. These conversations have to happen anyway. I made the point recently about the freshwater pearl mussel, which I've been doing some research on. Freshwater pearl mussel doesn't attack and kill sheep. It isn't the monster in our fairy tales. And yet the pearl mussel is critically endangered with extinction. And in order to save it, we would have to change absolutely everything. We'd have to change our farming, our forestry, how we use our bogs. All of these things have to happen anyway. So I think if we can, number one, have a proper, mature conversation about what has happened in Ireland and what's continuing to happen to nature in Ireland, and then I think that will be the starting point. And then if we start talking about, bringing back large areas of wetlands and woodlands, where are they going to go? I think you'll find that the wolves will fit into that conversation eventually, because of the utter transformation that has to happen all over the place.
Is not the worry that then you would really have a population of, let's say in air quotes, urban wolves, that with the they would have to kind of sneak out here and there? Because the argument I often hear is like, well, look, it's not true that the wolves need to have like a large, massive area of wilderness. They can coexist. They're very adaptable, and so on and so forth. And would that be the compromise that you would be happy with, at least for a start, to have these animals who are trying to survive really in the landscape? And is that worthy? You know what I mean? To introduce the population of wolves, but they're kind of not like, this is the area where they can go and do whatever wolves do. They're rather kind of wedged into the mosaic of farmer fields, sheep, this, that. Then you have an issue of control of, snaring or shooting or poaching and all of that would introduce like a massive amounts of issues. And would it be worthy in the end?
Well, I mean, I think there's nobody talking about bringing wolves back, this year or next year. I think we would have to obviously think these things through. I think wolves would survive in Ireland in theory today. But the big problem is that they would be shot and persecuted. So the issue is really human tolerance. But if we are to, let's say, tackle climate change, and if we're going to rewild the bogs, if we're going to transform our forestry, but then, I mean, we're talking about, look, where there would be decent-sized areas away from farmland. Now, of course, wolves are great travelers. They don't stay in one place. They could turn up anywhere, as you say. They could turn up at the edge of cities, or they could, turn up at the other side of the country. So, we'd have to be able to manage that. And put the processes in place. Now, this has been done before. This has been done in Holland, where they saw that wolves were coming in, from Germany, and they expected wolves to turn up in Holland. So they didn't wait for the wolves to turn up. They got active, and they started talking to farmers and talking to the state agencies about, how are we going to deal with this when it does happen.
Mhm.
And that's why I think it's important to talk about wolves now. For people who say, there's so many things that have to change, that's fine. But I mean, we have to be talking about these things now so that, maybe we would see actual animals on the ground in maybe 15, 20 years' time.
Yeah, I guess that's a unfortunate fact that when we talk about countries like Belgium or Netherlands, those wolves have, they can come from somewhere and they have somewhere to go. While Ireland being an island, it's like we literally have to bring the wolves in the cages here and cut them loose somewhere. It's not going to happen naturally, right?
No, it would have to be as a planned reintroduction. So, I mean that's has its pluses. It means we can control it a bit better. We could certainly make sure we bring in healthy animals, so we're not bringing in risk of disease or anything like that, and that we can have all the processes in place, in terms of public awareness, education programs with farmers, etc. So, I think all of those things are practical. The real thing that has to be worked out is can we get over our instinctive fear and of wolves and indeed wild nature in general. That's really where
Yeah.
the conversation has to be at.
And even like recently, I think it was again on Twitter, like was discussion about that potentially lynx would be a better choice for initial kind of reintroduction and kind of easing people into the mindset of rewilding, because kind of lynx are more secretive and that would be better, easier to swallow, let's say, for people who are against it.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, you look
I'm
in.
sensing that you're not in favor. You would go straight to the wolves.
Well, you see, I look at what happened in Britain when they reintroduced beavers. I mean, people still freaked out at the idea of beavers in the countryside.
Mhm.
They still had this very acrimonious debate. And we're only talking about beavers. People
Yeah.
get very excited about seagulls in Dublin, where I live. People get kind of outraged at the idea that
Yeah.
seagulls can be allowed to just fly around and do what they want in the
Hmm.
city. So I mean, I don't necessarily see lynx as solving that problem. I don't.
Hmm.
Maybe it would be easier, but maybe it wouldn't. I think reintroducing anything, learning to live with nearly anything. Requires a change in mindset. I think that has to be addressed. So yeah, do we try to do it the kind of gradualist, softly approach, or do we go for the big bang? Now, I mean,
Hmm.
I reckon we have lost 120 species of plants and animals in Ireland that we know about. Now, if we were
Hmm.
to do one reintroduction program per year,
Hmm.
that would
Hmm.
mean 120 years before we see our plants and animals come back. Do we have
Yeah.
120 years, considering the urgency of the climate and the biodiversity emergency? I don't really think we have that level of time to be, fiddling around thinking about it. So I think we have to kind of cut to the chase.
Well, you're mentioning like a 10, 15 years. Is that the time frame you think it's realistic?
Well, I mean, I would like to think so. Certainly, I think it's possible. I mean, you look at how the world has been transformed, Tommy, in the last 2 weeks with the COVID-19 emergency. Things can change very, very rapidly. People kind of look out 10, 15 years and assume that things are going to just be gradual, and at the current rate of change, we're never going to get there. But that's not how history progresses. We do manage to
True.
do things in sudden leaps or sudden shifts. And as I say, if we can work on the shift in our attitudes, then the wolves just won't be a problem.
That's true. That's true. And I think that the example that you gave about people freaking out about the seagull is a good illustration of what's going on. And even you mentioned the emergency with COVID-19. It's I heard that or read it somewhere that especially in the West, in the Western civilization, Western economy, or North or rich north, like some are saying, like we kind of got into this attitude like we are so disconnected and so like feeling safety, and like absolutely nothing can get in our way. And even if it's a seagull who snatches a potato chip, it's like a big outrage. It's like, oh my god, how dare you! Right? So
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this idea of progress, that humans will progress, we are masters of all we survey, we will conquer nature, that is proving to be a fallacy now. So, well, it always was, but, it is kind of staring us in the face now
yeah,
about what we're doing. And the links between the biodiversity emergency and the COVID-19 outbreak are plain to see. And there were plenty of warnings about it. So, yeah,
yeah.
this isn't a separate crisis to the environmental crisis we're dealing with. So it definitely needs a more comprehensive response.
Yeah, listen, and that's excellent segue to what you mentioned, the connection between the current health emergency and biodiversity loss. I read about I read a number of articles about it. I think that you also wrote an article about it. Um, I am not sure if I 100% agree with that. So let's explore this. So maybe let's start. If you can lay out like what's in your view the connection between biodiversity loss and the current situation with the virus that spreads across the world.
COVID-19 is called a zoonotic disease, which means it is carried and transmitted through animals. And it was the Wildlife Conservation Society in the US that I got the figure from. It said about 60% of our disease outbreaks in the last 3 decades have been zoonotic in origin. So they're talking about AIDS, Ebola, a lot of these SARS and MERS types diseases have come from the animal world. Now, I went back, I read the report from the UN's panel on biodiversity and ecosystem services, which was published last year. It hit the headlines because it warned that 1 million species were going to go extinct or were going to be threatened with extinction. But there is a section in that report about disease and about the increased risk of spreading zoonotic disease from the destruction of habitats, particularly forests, and also the illegal wildlife trade.
Mm-hmm.
This connection isn't new. I mean, if you look in the literature, people have been warning about this now for many decades.
Yes.
There's documentaries on Netflix that I watched recently that talked about how, if you want to know where to look for where these diseases emerge, look for the logging roads, look for the mining towns, the people who are, pressing into previously virgin rainforests. This is where the contact emerges between people and these ecosystems that have basically been undisturbed for millions of years. If we look at the current crisis in hand, it's suspected that it came from bats. There's also a suspicion that it came from pangolins. Pangolins are a group of species. I think there's 8 species in total. The most trafficked species in the world.
Yeah.
From Africa and India and other parts of Asia, they're all endangered with extinction. So to me the links between the collapse in biodiversity and our own health are very apparent.
Yeah, and this is conversation. I even wanted to record a video about that. I have this series on YouTube called Tommy Says, when I'm just kind of giving my opinion on stuff. And I recorded a video, and I ended up never publishing because I was not sure really. And I have a number of conversations with people about that, and I'm so happy to have you here because I would like to discuss that with you. So here's what I'm thinking. That I get it. That these are the arguments that are true, what you said. But then this is not something that is just happening. I mean, Chinese were eating bats and pangolins long before, and certainly, back in the times where most people in Europe were still sitting in the mud, Chinese already had a flourishing civilizations. And surely these things were happening before as well. And it's hard to me to buy into an argument that all of a sudden we pushed into this virgin and undiscovered pieces of the earth and we found like a new disease there. I think that we already done that many years ago, and we have almost no wild, like a true wilderness. There's very few far in between places, and they're very hard to go that are really unspoiled and not touched with human hand or human foot. So I'm trying to it's hard to me to get that argument like all of a sudden we discover this wilderness and we push into this wilderness and we get into contact with species that we never get into contact before, and this is why we have those zoonotic diseases that get transmitted to people. I think we were doing that long ago, and that was going on for a long time, for thousands of years. The difference is that we never had such a ease and volume of travel that we have now. So if that was year 867 and there was a big outbreak in China, well, nobody knows about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. I mean, this idea of zoonotic disease is not new. It's been with us throughout human history, and of course, our patterns of growth and human movement and our patterns of consumption are absolutely linked to the way that diseases like this can spread around the world so quickly. But you look at the illegal wildlife trade, illegal wildlife trafficking, is one of the top five illegal practices in the world. It's up there with drug trading, and it's up there with human slavery in terms of its magnitude and its value, which runs into billions of euro. And then you look at the amount of deforestation that has happened in the last 20, 25 years. Since 1990, we've lost an area of forest, virgin forest, about 15 times the size of Ireland. So you're talking about places in Southeast Asia. There wasn't wide scale deforestation going on in many parts of the world 1,000 years ago, or up until the 1500s. So that pace of habitat destruction and species loss is absolutely unprecedented in modern history, and that is why when you link that in with human patterns of growth and our flying all over the world and the way we live and the way we farm, the way we many animals around the world are densely compacted into factory farms and treated in unsavory conditions. There are many different facets to it. But the links are there, and we have to start seeing our health as being part of the wider planetary health.
Yeah, I suppose the bit that I'm finding counterintuitive is that the more we lose wildlife and species of animals, the more we get into contact with them, and therefore we have those diseases, right? I would more think like, well, the more we lose them, the less we have contact with nature, the less we have contact with those animals, not more. So I guess this is the bit that is a little bit counterintuitive to me.
Well, I mean, for many species, if you go in and destroy a forest and build a road or build a town or whatever, some species will go extinct, but many species will adapt. And so, whereas you had, let's say, bats flying around a forest, all of a sudden now you have bats maybe flying around human villages, flying into animal pens, coming into contact with us and our food systems, where there wasn't that level of contact before. So again, humanity is pushing deeper and deeper into previously untouched areas and exposing us to these novel viruses all the time.
No, I get that. This is the piece where I have to agree with that. But I still have this other side in the back of my head. Do you not? Well, maybe not. Afraid is the wrong word, but I'm just wondering if the result of that reasoning is, all right, so we need less contact with wildlife and we need less wildlife because we have those zoonotic diseases. So instead of protecting, because like you have two options. Like, I'm not saying you have two options, but you can imagine that you have two ideas. One idea is like, okay, let's preserve all this wildlife and all those untouched places. Let's fence them and let's not get anyone in there because there are diseases and all that stuff. And then what follows is like, well, if this wildlife in these wild areas is nothing but just a source of diseases, let's get rid of it, right? Let's get rid of bats, let's get rid of pangolins, let's get rid of all that stuff. We won't have that problem. And I see the danger that this reasoning can lead then to like, okay, let's solve this problem once for all that way, rather than through protection, because why would you protect something that will ultimately give you disease that you can't cure?
I imagine, Tommy, some people will follow that line of thought. I imagine there will be people saying, "Oh well, let's go out and get all the bats," and then we'll rid ourselves of this problem. But of course, that's only part of the problem. The bats didn't create the epidemic, the pandemic. As you say, it is human activity that created the pandemic, even if the actual virus originated in bats. So
yes.
So it is recognizing this link. So I think the message is we have to stop destroying nature. We have to stop illegally trafficking wild animals around the world. We have to stop some of these practices, like these wet markets that you see in parts of Asia. These are the things that we have to stop doing.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm just a little bit worried that what most of people are like a global conscious will get out of that, like, okay, we need to be even more separated from nature. Like even now, like, okay, let's stay at home. And so I see this pattern emerging. Okay, let's stay at home. Don't touch bats. Don't do anything with wildlife. We need to, and perhaps we need the opposite. We need, and I think that you agree that we need the opposite. We need more contact with nature. We need more nature around. And this is how we started this conversation, right? Let's have this little rewilding projects on our backyard, and let's bring back the nature. Because my personal thought is, and obviously I'm not an expert in medicine or infectious diseases, but I read one article where one of the infectious diseases expert was saying that part of what is to blame is very poor condition of human health and human immune systems, because we are so isolated from nature, because our gut biome is not what it used to be, and certainly what it should be, because we have all the vegetables washed and sprayed and clean, and we have plastic in our blood, like we know, and our immune system is not what it used to be, and our immune system should deal with this virus no problem. And in most cases it does, but still it creates huge problems. And perhaps the problem is here that we have not enough contact with nature. We're not integrated enough with that nature. We too much separated, and we as a human animal are suffering. And this is why we have all those problems.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I hadn't heard it before, but I can see the line of reasoning there, and I do also see the risk that you're talking about. That people are already kind of afraid of nature, and will this just heighten that fear of nature and say we need to be more tidy and sanitizing, and we need to stay in more and keep our
Exactly.
distance from things, whether it's spiders or whatever, or the birds in the
Yeah.
garden
Yeah.
and all these things. Of course, I mean, most of the forests in the world are inhabited by indigenous peoples. So it's not, the argument I'm trying to make is not that we need to build a big, fence and separate us out from nature, but this is the point, that we are a part of nature, but we have to nourish that relationship a little bit more. But I see what you mean. It is a big worry that we are living in the dystopian future, that I don't know if you know Blade Runner, where the people just live in these awful cities that are totally natureless, and outside is pretty much dead, and all our food is manufactured in factories. From artificial food stocks, I mean, that's actually, a realistic, trajectory that we're on at the moment.
It's scary, but it's not that hard to imagine.
No. I mean, we have choices. We have to remember that as humans and societies, we have choices about how things transpire. So, I think we have to use this moment wisely, and think very carefully about the kind of future, because certainly the reckoning is coming. You see this pandemic happening at a time now where literally global ecosystems are collapsing around us from overexploitation and climate change, whether it's the Arctic ice sheets and the coral reefs and the tropical rainforests. So major change is on the way. I really feel that what we're living through at the moment is just a taster.
But you mean it's a taster, and if things are gonna go for better or for worse? What's your
Either way, I think I think we can choose to see the connections now and act positively, or we can be carried away in a kind of a business as usual trajectory, in which case inequalities are heightened. The rich basically say that they're just going to save themselves. There'll be food crises, there'll be water crises, there'll be war and migration. I mean, all these things sound like the four horsemen, but we're actually living through a taster of it, and that is why our participation in civil society, our political systems are so important, because at the end of the day, these are choices that are made. They're not just things that happen by themselves. They're choices that are made, so we really have to make sure they're the right ones.
No, that's true, and just to inject some positive vibe, maybe. I think, and again, it's not like I thought it up, but this is kind of opinion that I formed after reading and listening to a lot of people. That's it's really only last 50 years, maybe 20 years, that we realized what's going on, and the argument is like, how quickly would you expect humans to react? And in the past, we adapted to many things, and we reacted positively, and move on. So perhaps it's just it's just the beginning, and like you said, we're just about to wake up, and this is just a very recent in terms of human population, right? Where you talk about 30-50 years as a recent thing, where we start waking up to these things, and it's like, oh, hang on a minute, right? Because we had a like, as a humanity, pretty I think good track record on what was it called, CFC, the things that were destroying the ozone layer, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got rid of that. We got rid of mercury, and that was used everywhere. We got rid of lead, and we're still in the process of getting rid of lead. We had the lead pipes, we don't have them anymore. So this is gradual process, and I think I'm certainly hopeful that we're just waking up to these things. And it's not all doom and gloom, except there is an inertia, and we need some time to react, and we need some time to transform mindsets, change of people. The new generation will come in that is more conservation minded, and more of us like, hey, our grandparents and our parents were able to go out and fish on the shore and catch those big fish. I can't do that anymore. Like, what happened? And inevitably those people were then get into the governments, get into the decision making positions, and that's how we start changing. So I'm kind of hopeful, to be honest. At least I want to be.
Oh, I mean, we all want to be hopeful, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you look at, you mentioned CFCs and lead and petrol and all these things.
Yeah.
Those developments happened around the 1970s, 1980s. Remember, we're coming up to the 50th anniversary of Earth Day in the United States. The Earth Summit happened in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. All these things were being spoken about then, habitat destruction and climate change, and there was great hope in the world. And certainly, this is the time I was growing up. I kind of felt that, this is progress, and that, environmental regulations will tighten and things will gradually improve. Of course, we've seen in recent years that things can go into reverse with the Trump administration in America, that, all these regulations can be undone. So this is it's the point I'm emphasizing, is that, it very much requires, we can't just sit back as citizens and assume that things are going to follow a certain trajectory. We have to be involved as citizens. We have to be active. We have to do more than hope. We have to really get active. So, I mean, if you're optimistic, you can say, we are at a turning point. Humanity will get its act together. We know what the solutions are. We know we can feed everybody without destroying the world. We have the solutions to clean energy. We know that conservation works whenever it is tried, whether it's restoring habitats and protecting species. There's lots of examples of it actually working. So the solutions are not beyond us. But of course, it's just as easy to be pessimistic and see how things can go the other way, how you can see that with the rise of nationalism in certain countries, that this will provoke fear in people, and to say we need to shut ourselves off from other countries, from other people, from nature, and that we'll see the path of degradation go downwards. So it's not, to me, like, optimism and pessimism are not really useful ideas in this debate. It's about whether we're willing to implement the solutions and whether we're willing to fight for those solutions to be implemented.
That's a very good point. Listen, Pádraic, thanks for that. Thanks for your time. It was great to chat it through and kind of bounce those ideas back and forth, because I think it's important, and even for people listening to that, get their cogs in their brain going and thinking about what we said. So thanks for that. And as usual, is there anything else you would like to leave us with? Any message?
Well, just I suppose, Tommy, it is a worrying time for everybody, and maybe just the message is not to feel that this is that all these problems are inevitably leading to our doom. There are lots of community and social and regional efforts, and my message to people is get involved and get active and participate and make sure that our voices are heard. So that the better world actually happens.
Absolutely. Pádraic, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tommy.